Our guest today is a very special guest. She is an international corporate attorney turned world famous meditation teacher. She is the founder of New York Insight Meditation Center and Westchester Insight Meditation Center. And she is one of the best teachers I have ever seen in my entire life. She happens to be my own teacher, and that's why I'm kissing up a little. That's always good advice to be doing this. And at the end of the broadcast today, she will be revealing my report card to you. Am I a good student, a bad student? We will find out. Welcome to the show, Gina Sharpe. It is an honor to have you here today.
Brian, it's my pleasure, and I'm so happy to be with all of you. I wish I could see you. I know you're there. So I'm going to imagine all of your beautiful faces. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm very honored to be asked. Thank you, Brian.
So can you just tell us, I know you're a mindfulness teacher. Can you tell us just, we'll go more in more depth later on, but just some brief bullet points about what you teach, kind of what your background is?
When you say background, what do you mean?
I mean,
many backgrounds.
The background as a teacher, what you're bringing today, what your background is as a mindfulness teacher. Yeah.
Sure. So this meditation is a meditation that I've learned and practiced in various Asian countries, in Burma, called now Myanmar, and Thailand, and Japan, and Nepal, and Tibet. So I've been to many of those places and took instructions from beautiful masters in all of those countries. Essentially, it's a meditation that's a technique that's been around for thousands of years, used by non-religious and religious people alike, by agnostics, by atheists, and people of every religion and faith. So a huge body of study from the University of Wisconsin that started in the early 1980s shows the benefits and practice and of daily practice of meditation. So according to those studies, and since then, daily practice has benefits and advantages, makes us happier, less stressed, more focused, more effective, more awake, could I say more? And there are many studies online, but the basic message is that it's something to be experienced personally, and I can also personally testify to it.
And can you share some of this meditation practice with all of us now?
Be happy to. So wherever you are and whatever has happened for the day, just bring yourself to what is true now in your present experience. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you tasting? What are you smelling? What are you touching? And I'm going to, with each question or instruction, I'm just going to be silent for a moment to give you an opportunity to tune into your own experience. So to move from listening to me to actually listening to your own body and your own mind and your own heart. So I'm going to use bells to just ring when I would ask you to start listening to me again. So notice how you've been sitting. If you're sitting on a chair and your back is against the chair, see if you can make it just a light touch so that you're sitting upright and not needing anything to be your support, but your own self-awareness and your own self-regard. So sit with your back relatively straight, but it should be natural, not forced. And let the curve of your back be attentive. If your eyes are closed, that's quite wonderful. If you'd rather not have your eyes closed, Let your eyes just simply gaze down, slightly open, and bring attention to the body, to the sensations that may appear in the body when you're breathing. You can start with a specific place in the body to follow the breathing, around the nose, the chest, the stomach, or simply the whole body breathing. See where it is easiest for you to notice, where it's most easily noticed, and follow the sensations there. And if you notice a part of the body, I usually feel it in my shoulders that are hiked up or tense in some ways. Just notice that, and without any judgment, see if you can bring that part of the body to some more ease than it is feeling now. So when you're breathing in, know that you're breathing in and follow the sensations. And when you're breathing out, know you're breathing out and follow the sensations. I'm going to be quiet now for a little while and let you practice that. Some people find it helpful to follow the breathing sensations with a word, silently saying in when the air comes in and out when the air goes out, paying attention to the full measure of the breath. If the mind wanders away, which it most likely will from time to time, gently bring your attention back to the breathing. The wandering is not a mistake, it's not a problem, not something to feel guilty about or think you failed. Without this process, there is no insight that comes from meditation. And when our attention drifts away from the sensations of breathing, we simply bring it back. And that's the essence of the meditation practice, the mindfulness practice. Allow the breathing to take place all by itself naturally. No need to try to change it, but simply follow the sensations of the process of the air coming in and going out from the body as specifically as you can. Every time the mind wanders, you notice and identify the object that appears, that draws the attention. Thoughts, sounds, sensations, perhaps emotions even. Silently identify the object. Note thoughts if it's thoughts. Sensations, notice heat or cold or itching. Emotions, we say sadness or joy or boredom or excitement. If sounds, hearing, just notice what's happening, what's appearing in the experience or the consciousness or the awareness, and without judging or analyzing, allow that to fall away and bring the attention back to the breathing of the body. When you're ready, you can open your eyes.
That was very refreshing. Thank you.
You're welcome. My
Thank you
pleasure.
for that. So we did a little bit of polling, Gina, to see where the students are, because of course everyone's been confined inside during the pandemic. So people are having different emotional reactions, which we've been measuring week after week. And our theme today is compassion and community, which you wanted to speak to us about. So I did a little polling to see where the students felt in regards to these topics. So here's what we've learned. The question was asked, how much compassion do you receive from others? 44% of the students said, very few people I know treat me with compassion. 33% said, some people I know treat me with compassion. And 22.2% said, most people I know are compassionate towards me. So then we asked them, has the pandemic changed your level of compassion? So 22% said, I feel more compassionate towards others. And 11.1% said, I feel less compassionate. The rest stayed exactly the same. Then we asked, which community do you go to most often for support? And they were given a wide range of options, different communities they could go to. It could be a religious community, a sports community, hobbies, musical, everything. But they only chose from 3 categories. 50% said they go to their friends, 40% said they go to their family, and 10% said, I don't feel like I received any support, which was kind of surprising. And then I wanted to know some specifics. What is one example where you have shown compassion to somebody in the last week? So this is just like a sampling of what they reported back. I helped my dad who was struggling to clean because of his bad back. I baked a cake to make my family feel better. I hugged my mom when she was crying. I gave advice to my friend when she was having a problem. Making breakfast for my siblings when they're sleeping. Putting my life at risk to see if someone was okay. And someone said, I haven't shown any compassion to anyone. So this is what I like to say, this is the field to which we're speaking to. This is a sampling. So we're going to address these concerns very directly. But before we do that, I'd like to explore a little bit about your unique background that made you become a mindfulness teacher. And you immigrated to the U.S. at 11. Is that true?
That's true, yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about that, where you came from and what the circumstances were?
I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, land of Bob Marley and reggae. I don't know if you're all familiar with him, but I feel quite allegiant to Jamaica, especially because Bob was born there, and
everybody knows Bob Marley.
Everybody knows Bob Marley, yeah. So I actually met him several years after I'd come to the United States and gone back. But it's a long story, so I won't bore you with it now. But he actually was responsible for my hair looking the way it does, because I used to straighten my hair. Huh. And when I went to Jamaica, it was very humid, so my hair would curl back up. And I'd get very frustrated, and he'd say, "Sister, let your hair go free," to basically stop straightening it. So that's a side.
Wait, how did you know Bob Marley? We can't just let that one go slide. How did you meet Bob Marley?
The way I met Bob Marley is I went down to Jamaica with friends who were in the music business, and a friend actually who was his manager, and then was his basically owned a lot of the copyrights to his music. And so we went to visit him. So that's how I met him. Anyway, I was born in Jamaica. I immigrated to America when I was 11 years old. My mother had come before me. She had divorced my father, who was violent, and she came to America basically to seek a new life, and left us in Jamaica for a while. And that's a long story, which I won't bore you with. But we then eventually, she was able to bring us here. And the story there, I'll give you another story, was I don't know if your students will know Duke Ellington, but he was a very famous band leader in the 40s and 50s up to I think about the 70s in America.
Well, what they will be familiar with, even if they don't know that name, is the Harlem Renaissance.
Right.
And Duke Ellington was the major figure. The other figure they're probably familiar with is Langston Hughes.
Right.
So, kids, if you're watching, Duke Ellington was to music what Langston Hughes was to poetry. The Harlem Renaissance.
Okay, so then this story will be of interest. So Duke Ellington my mother married a musician who was a composer whose music Duke Ellington sometimes played, and they were great friends. And he heard my mom crying because she was sad that she didn't have enough money in the bank to bring my sisters and me to America, because in those days, I don't know if it's still true, you need a certain amount of money in the bank to prove to the government that your kids, when you bring them, won't be dependent on the government. So Duke heard her crying because she didn't have enough money. When he asked her why, she told him, and he gave her the money to put into her bank account to prove that we would not become wards of the state. So fast forward many years later, when I graduate from Barnard College, Duke Ellington is being given an honorary doctorate at Columbia across the street. And I thought it was an amazing demonstration of how lawful the universe is, that he was being honored on the same day that he had done this beautiful thing for my family.
So your presence in the United States is a direct result of the compassion of Duke Ellington.
That is correct.
And then you went to law school after this? Is this correct?
I went to law school after Barnard, yeah. and became a litigator. I graduated from law school and became a litigator in a corporate law firm, and did courtroom work, and that's how I met my husband, actually. And but then during all of those years, I had become involved with a teacher who one day looked at me and said, I should meditate. And I said, how do I do that? And she said, no big deal. Just sit up in bed every day when you wake up and close your eyes for 15, 30, or 45 minutes. And so I did that for several years, and then I started reading, and I got more instructions, and I traveled, and I found teachers, and so that's how it kind of all developed.
So why would this hardened, I don't want to say that you were hardened, but you were a lawyer.
I wasn't hardened.
Not hardened, but a litigator, right? You have to have a certain tenacity to be a litigator. What would, say it again? Steel?
Yes.
Okay. So if you have a lot of steel, most people with a lot of steel aren't looking to meditate. So what was the attraction to you to meditate?
Well, the attraction to meditate was that once I started doing it, I realized that I could actually go through life without the edge that I had been going through life as. And I'm not implying that I don't have an edge now, because I do. But that there was a way in which my temper could be a little bit rounder. It's not that there isn't a lot of injustice in the world or ways in which you really can get upset or angry at the systems and the way things are and the oppression in our cultures, but that I could actually be present for my own suffering, for all of the difficulties that I was having, whether it was through anger or upset or failure or whatever the reasons were for being upset, that I could actually come back to balance. And it doesn't mean that as a human being that upset disappears or bad luck disappears in life or things always go the same way that you want them to go or are successful, but that one can actually develop an attitude of, and if I were to really make it simple, instead of blaming, shaming either myself or others for things that didn't go right, I could instead ask the question, what am I learning? And that question for me has been a real stabilizer. That instead of becoming so overwhelmed by emotions, and it's not that I don't have emotions, but I can actually not become so overwhelmed by them that I'm not thinking clearly, or I'm not compassionate when it's appropriate, or that I'm not having a way of balancing myself so that I can respond appropriately to the conditions of my life and to whatever is happening in my life.
So when we practice mindfulness, we're not trying to make these difficult emotions go away necessarily, right?
Exactly.
We're trying to find a way to navigate through them in a way that's more, to use your word, compassionate towards ourselves and other people. Is that correct?
That's a perfect summary, Brian. Thank you.
I have a good teacher. Anyway, so before we get into the mindfulness, I can't skip over, because I know there are certain pieces of your life story that are just very relevant from a historical standpoint that the kids are studying in school. One is that you worked in the Lindsay administration, a New York City mayor, Mayor Lindsay. You were at a young age, you were in that administration. Is that correct?
Yes, in my late teens, early 20s more than late teens. Yeah.
And the other one is that you personally knew Robert Kennedy.
Yep. My mother worked at a place called the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Company, which is in Bedford-Stuyvesant, because in those days, Bedford-Stuyvesant wasn't as stylish as it is now. It was really a very depressed and difficult neighborhood to live in. And Franklin Thomas, who was given a huge grant by the Ford Foundation, started a whole project in Bedford-Stuyvesant to restore it, because it's a beautiful place, but it had become blighted and difficult because of economic circumstances. And Robert Kennedy was very interested in that project, and so would go and visit my mother's office. And so she was very much in love with Senator Kennedy as he was in those days. And I actually met him. I was visiting her one day and he was there. So I met him and we chatted. And as I think I may have told you, Brian, it's the only time in my life that my knees have ever buckled when I've met someone. His eyes were so penetrating and so beautiful and so compassionate.
So the students read about him in a textbook. What kind of man was he that you observed?
He was kind. He was brilliant, very, very quick on his feet, had a huge sense of humor, beautiful sense of humor, but had, I think, his primary quality was compassion. He would actually weep when he sometimes heard people's stories, especially stories of poverty, stories of oppression, stories of racism and prejudice, would literally make him weep. And he always went out of his way to meet people on the street rather than being with the elite or being with his political friends. He was always, as I observed it, much more comfortable being with people who were struggling, frankly, and who had stories of interest that connected him with the underprivileged, because he was a very privileged man.
So your emphasis on his compassion, did it inform your kind of the emphasis of your life and your teaching is on compassion? Did it have some sort of effect on you in that way?
Perhaps it did. I'm not sure that I ever directly connected that, but I think when, as a young person, who you do encounter as adults and what their qualities are can greatly influence you. Because for me, it's always been an intuitive feeling. It's never been a kind of analysis of is this person going to be helpful to me? But actually meeting somebody in person and feeling the way they make you feel, right? So being with him was an experience of love and kindness and compassion. And I know that made me feel really good when I was with him. And he was obviously not the only person in my life who was like that. There were people in my life who were the opposite of that. But the people in my life who were like that, I think, really influenced me because I could feel the field around them actually expressing their internal state. And I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but I recognized that because of his kindness and his compassion, being in his presence made me feel kind, made me feel compassionate, and made me feel valued. So I wanted to be the same for others because I knew how good that made me feel. So that's what I wanted to bring to the world for myself.
So we have a student that asked the question, was there ever a time where you felt someone didn't deserve compassion?
Well, I think I can meet that on two levels. I think on the level of wherever I'm wounded, and I'll explain that in a moment, that wherever I'm wounded, there may be that thought that comes in the mind. And depending on the circumstances, that feeling may dissolve either quickly or it may take some work on my part. Now, the work begins when I recognize that feeling is toxic to my own being, and that then needs some work, right? Because if I'm feeling not compassionate or I'm feeling cruel towards somebody, that's on me. That's me feeling that. And what I know now is that every emotion that we feel produces a certain kind of chemical in the body. So if I'm feeling mean and cruel and angry, those are the chemicals I'm producing. And in some ways, then becomes a vicious cycle, because that's going to ramp up my feelings of disdain or anger or whatever it is. Whatever it is I'm feeling is going to get ramped up. So,
and when you say a chemical, like, that's everyone watching, this is a literal chemical. It's called cortisol, and
exactly.
It goes through your veins, and it actually makes you feel bad.
Exactly. And so even though I may in my mind be thinking thoughts that should make the other person feel bad, actually the only person I'm making feel bad.
So the same person who asked that question said, can you put your feelings aside and give compassion to others who might not be giving you the same in return?
These are beautiful questions, by the way, not that I want to judge them, but this is a really beautiful question, because whoever asked the question is getting to the heart of this kind of mindfulness work, because essentially we're human. So when somebody treats us badly, all of the feelings get kicked up of anger and revenge and all of those ways in which, because they're making us feel so bad, we want them to feel just as bad. But then an intelligent approach to that is really understanding our own chemistry and our own way of producing internally what we think is optimal for our own systems. So the invitation with mindfulness is to observe internally, observe externally, and then observe the relationship between the internal and the external. And so I'm constantly trying to do that.
Can you break that down a little bit when you say the internal and the external?
Yeah. So I have an internal feeling. So I'm looking at you and Regine on my screen right now. And I'm having some very pleasant feelings towards you, right? So I can notice that internally, I'm having very pleasant thoughts just seeing your images, right? And then externally, I recognize there's a whole other reality out there. You're both dealing with your internal thoughts, your internal feelings, the experience you may have had right before you got onto the screen, right? So whatever I'm projecting onto you may or may not be true, but I can see the relationship between how I feel about you, and then perhaps what comes back from you, and and that whole loop. That then, because we're in relationship somehow, there's always a loop between us, and what I'm sending out may come back, or I may say something that you misunderstand, and so you say something that's angry. So can I keep those in context? So if you say something that's angry towards me, can I be enough in my own body and my own heart to say, oh, maybe Brian misunderstood what I said because I didn't mean any offense. So let's have a conversation instead of then lashing back out at you.
So Caitlin is an 11th grader, and she asks this question. She says, what does meditation have to do with compassion? So when we breathe and when we're in our body, what is the relationship between that and being compassionate?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you, Caitlin. So there is an instruction I sometimes give in meditation, which I received from a Zen teacher of mine. And the instruction is to observe the state of your back and to make it strong, and then to observe the state of your front and to make it soft. And that teacher explained it as, when we have a strong back, we're able to withstand the winds of life. And when we have a soft heart, we are able to open to compassion and kindness and all of those qualities that are not only good for ourselves, but good for the world. So when we have this soft front and we're compassionate and kind and loving and all of that, it doesn't mean that we're making our back soft. So we're able to withstand the winds of life, which are not always that easy to withstand. But with a strong back, we're able to stand upright and yet to feel the compassion that a soft heart brings. I hope that's helpful.
So this goes back to what I was asking you before, when you had steel in you as an attorney and you decided to practice meditation. There are adults and for sure kids who think, I don't want to be soft. I don't want to sit there and meditate and people are going to take advantage of me and people are going to walk all over me and I don't want to do that. So you're talking about meditation to cultivate a sense of resiliency, strength, in combination with like a soft receptivity to other people
and tenderness.
And tenderness.
I think tenderness makes us really strong. And that's a long conversation. But I do think that if we have this soft heart that's able to receive the suffering of the world. And right now in this pandemic, there's a lot that we are asked to really receive because there are many people suffering in so many different ways. But that ability to be able to take it in, I think really makes us so much stronger because we're not resisting. When we're resisting, we become stiff and hard. When we're able to take it in, we're soft. We're able to bend with the winds of life that are coming at us. It's like if you look at bamboo, right? Bamboo looks really kind of delicate, but bamboo is really strong. So in the wind, it may bend, but it won't break. And that's the image that I love of the strong back and the soft heart and the soft front.
Can you take in too much of the world's suffering and it's just overwhelming to you?
Yes, and I weep when that happens.
So we have Regine, who's here with us live. She has a couple questions for you, Gina. And like you, Regine came here when she was the exact same age at 11. So Regine, welcome. You can unmute yourself there.
Hi, Regine.
Hi. So my question is, I have experienced a lot of anxiety and fear since the pandemic began. What should I do?
So first thing I would do, I don't know what you should do, but I can say that how I would deal with that, and maybe that will be helpful to you, is to actually know the feeling of fear. So that's another thing that meditation is good for. It prepares the mind to be able to withstand the winds of life that come at us. So fear is one of those that can really weaken us. And a lot of the ways in which fear weakens us is because we become resistant to it, because it feels as if we're going to tighten up, as if we can't bear what's going to happen and something terrible is going to happen. So we're more anticipatory, as in fear, than we are really knowing what's happening at the present moment. So, which mindfulness really prepares us to do. So can you actually be with the fear and know how it affects your body, how it affects what the thoughts that you're having in your mind, the emotion of fear, what that feels like? You know, is it heat? Is it cold? Is it stiff? Is it flexible? What does fear actually feel like in your body? And so that's the actual somatic or physical experience of it. And then you can also know, what do you think the opposite of fear is?
Brave.
The opposite of fear is love. So can you actually soften your heart with love in the moment when you're most afraid? Can you put your hand on your heart and say, oh, Regine, darling, you're afraid. I'm afraid. I'm really afraid. And can you have compassion for that? Can you have compassion for this feeling of fear? And instead of believing it or judging it or wanting it to go away, melt into it. and see if you can bring some love to this beautiful being called Regine. And see and then observe. Does the fear stay? Does it get worse? Does it get better? Does it disappear? Does it come back? What is this thing we call fear? It's usually a combination of ideas in the mind. Something terrible is going to happen, because it's never about what's happening. It's always about what might happen or will happen. So what are the thoughts? What are the feelings in the body? And how can I meet this fear with some love, and without thinking I shouldn't be afraid, how terrible that I'm afraid, and judging yourself and all of that. That's all extra. But the meeting of it can be a beautiful, graceful way of being with it, and then watching it rise and fall, because no emotion ever stays exactly the same, but we can actually observe it moving through time and space. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have another question. How did race and your immigrant background influence your decision to practice mindfulness?
I'm not sure that it did in the beginning. I think I'm a human being first. And so I understood that I wasn't happy. Right? And so I was willing to try anything, actually. Now, after I started learning and practicing and traveling and having some experience, and I realized that all of the communities that I was working in, especially because I'd been a lawyer and I was in privileged society, that there weren't a lot of people of color in my vicinity. And so when I became a Buddhist teacher, a teacher of mindfulness too, I wanted company, people who looked like me and people who'd had similar experiences. And so I started to work towards making the communities that I was practicing with and that I was part of, making them more diverse. And I've done a pretty good job with some amazing colleagues. We've worked together to make the communities look a bit different than they were when we were just practicing originally.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for those beautiful questions.
Thank you.
Great question, Regine. Because Gene, I know you and I have had this conversation. I've had it with previous guests. Leslie Booker was one of them, who I know you know, in particular, where like some of this work that I have to do with the kids a lot of times is to convince them that this mindfulness is not necessarily a white thing, because that's sometimes the perception.
Yeah.
And especially when they look at someone like me teaching it, it only furthers that perception.
Right.
When you see magazines and you see on television, usually the image is of someone who looks like that, who's meditating or doing yoga. But this is a practice that can help anybody, all races, all ages, all genders, whatever.
Well, the fact that it started in Asia means that the people who started practicing it had nothing to do with being white, right? These are all people of color, of various hues and shades, brown and black, and all different shades of skin color. And we know that race is a construct, but that's a whole other place to go with it. But I think it's a really important question. Having seen another video yesterday of a black man being killed by a white cop having his knee on his neck, and Ahmaud Arbery being killed for jogging, basically. That we have a long way to go about race in our country, and in my particular corner of the world that practices mindfulness, the work is not. One would think that because everybody's meditating together, etc., that it's an easy road, but it's not, because these habits, these racial habits, especially in America, are very baked in, and we all know that whether we're white, black, or brown, that habits are conditioned, and that in order to change them, it takes a lot of work. And so I've dedicated myself to continuing the work, as painful as it can be. And it has been painful from time to time. But it's worthwhile, because we need to have parity, racial parity, in all aspects of American and world and global life. So I really appreciate the question. Thank you.
So we have a ninth grader who asked the question, I don't really like or trust people or groups of people. They're usually selfish. Why should I care about community?
Well, that's one attitude. That's one opinion. What would it be like to look at everyone as just human? So, the woman who won American Idol this year is called Just Sam, a beautiful Black woman. And I love the fact that she called herself Just Sam, because it sounds so like just human. And yes, you will encounter people who are selfish, and you will encounter people who are racist, and you will encounter people who have bad habits. But are we to throw them all away? And again, so if we look at the internal and the external, can you look at your own habits internally and see where all of these opinions that we have about people externally can sometimes apply to us too? And that none of us is static, that we're constantly living a life where, so today I wake up and I'm, quite happy and looking forward to meeting with all of you. And then there are other days where I just want to pull the cover over my head, right? So if I look at myself, I can't say that I'm always this awake and woke, enlightened person, but that it comes and goes. And if I know that about myself, can I be at least a little bit compassionate for somebody when they're having a bad day? And instead of labeling that person as a bad person because they're having a bad day, in my own mind, to keep what we were talking about before, the chemistry of my body balanced, just send them some kind of good wish as well as you can. You may be hurt by them, and so you feel as if you can't say anything positive, but for your own sake, wish them well internally.
And we had Sharon Salzberg on the show, and she did a loving kindness practice that I know you're familiar with, where we actually did this repeated phrases, sending them out to other people. What I hear you saying in a lot of different ways is that compassion is the result of seeing your own pain and suffering.
Yes.
So you, as this attorney who had a lot of steel in you, realized that you were not happy. You wanted to change that. You began practicing meditation. In the process of practicing meditation, you looked inside of yourself and you saw pain and suffering. And then at a certain point, you looked out into the world and saw that these same feelings existed in other people, and that evoked a sense of compassion. We're the same. I'm suffering, they're suffering, and it automatically happened as a result of you seeing it that clearly. Is that correct?
That's correct. I want to add something. So the beautiful responses that you read about compassion told me something about your group. And that is that you already are recognizing your connection to the community. And what really jumped out at me is that when you talked about compassion, you didn't talk about it as a feeling. You talked about it mostly in those responses as some action that you took, whether it was internal or external, that you took an action. You spoke to somebody kindly, or you did something to help them, but you did something. And I think it's a really important point that our feelings can become activated in community, that we see ourselves rather than as singular, dissociated or disconnected beings, that we see ourselves as dependent on each other. I think if this pandemic has done anything, it has shown us how dependent we are on each other. That if somebody doesn't wear a mask, they may infect untold number of people. That we are so connected that our actions actually do matter in the world. And I loved your responses that you read, because that's what I heard so beautifully, is that the feelings of compassion weren't just, oh, I'm feeling compassionate, but here's what I can do for the suffering of someone else. And what would the world look like if we were all in search of what we can do for somebody who's suffering? What would the world, just give it, I'm just going to give you 2 seconds to imagine a world in which we are all seeking a way of being of service to somebody who's suffering.
And this was one of my own personal insights from doing this show with the kids, because we poll them each week and they offer their own strategies for how they're finding peace in the middle of this. And there is just a natural innate wisdom that I've seen that these kids haven't been trained in any particular way, unless like they've taken this mindfulness class. But even the ones who haven't have like a whole storehouse of wisdom that they were just seemingly born with. And that's what they're sharing week after week.
Yes. So let me share something that's just happened to me. Right before this call, literally before this program started, my stepdaughter called to tell me that her mother is in the hospital and probably dying.
Oh.
Okay. So I could have fallen apart because I'm very sad about it. And yet there was this amazing opportunity to speak to all of you. And I wish I could see all of your faces. But there was this amazing opportunity for me to be of service to you. And I thought, what better way to honor her as she is dying than to, at least in my part of the world, create beauty.
So to that end, a 12th grader asked the question, I don't know what to do with my life. How did you figure out your path?
Oh, lovely question. Thank you for that question. I didn't figure it out, is the short answer. I actually tried to be awake or attentive to what is happening now, and to notice all of the stories that I had about what's happening now, and to try to sort out what is true and what is not true. And because I could make up a lot of stories, and I recognize that. We all can. And then to see as a pathway presented itself to make the best decision I could make. And then so one thing just led to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. When my mother was weeping in that room, and Judge Duke Ellington found her weeping, she wasn't weeping to get his attention. She was weeping because it was a genuine feeling of sadness or helplessness. And his connection, his humanity, connected to that feeling of helplessness, and in compassion, he wanted to help. She wasn't planning, making it happen, but actually just taking the next step, the next step, the next step, and trusting myself to do the best I can for myself, as well as for the people around me.
So now in doing that, though, you have to do 2 things, right? You have to plan for life. We have seniors and they have to apply to college, and they have to take the next steps. So you're saying it's like twofold, right? You actually have to plan ahead, but you have to be present in the moment to recognize opportunities when they come.
Thank you for explaining that beautifully.
So is there anything else that you want to share that you haven't shared with the kids right now, or the adults watching?
Yeah, I love you. Regine, thank you for being the kind of stand-in for however many people are on this call. I wish I could see them all. I love you. And I will say this to Regine, hoping that you will all feel that. And you know, whether you love me or not is not really my business, right? My business is to love you as best I possibly can, and hopefully to serve you, because we're all in this human life together, and it is hard. It's poignant, and it's also incredibly beautiful and tender. No matter what our difficulties are, no matter how tough it seems at the moment, if we can keep our presence and keep our understanding of who we are as well as we possibly can, then we can understand the whole, all of humanity, because we are, each of us is a symbol of humanity and an aspect of it. So we're given this gift of life so that we can tend to the beauty of what it means to be human.
And I feel the love back from that sentiment from you. And I think this might change the tone a bit, but I promised that we would go down this road. We have Damien, he's an 11th grader, and he says, how is Simmons as a student? So I need to get a report card right now. Be honest, you don't have to give me an A, you could fail me. Live, we can say right now, these kids get graded, they have report cards coming. And what I want them to know is that you never stop having teachers. When you're 90 years old, you will have teachers. I have one. You are one of my teachers, primary teachers. What is my report card? How did I do? Am I passing, failing? What's going on?
I have teachers too, but some of them don't even know they're my teachers. So, well, I will tell you all that in the beginning, Mr. Simmons and I did not have a smooth sailing. He was a very tough student to you know what I mean, to get it.
I still am sometimes.
To get into order. And what was beautiful about him was that he was humble enough, although sometimes it may not appear so. He was humble enough to actually hear when he got feedback that wasn't meant to be cruel or harsh or hard, but that may have been difficult to hear. And I think for that you get an A, because I think that's the secret of being a student, is a kind of humility that knows I need to be taught. And I still feel that in my own life, that everything teaches me. The people I meet teach me. My experience teaches me, what I read teaches me, what I hear teaches me. I have birds in my garden right now. They're all singing and they're teaching me. So that's what I would say about Mr. Simmons, is that he actually, I wouldn't call him humble.
Come on, not humble.
I'd give him a B on the humble piece. But I'd give him.
I'll take a B. I'll take it.
But I'd give him an A on the receptivity and the willingness to be taught and the willingness to learn. And I think that that's the most important quality of any student.
I think I just did much better than I expected to do. So thank you to my teacher for that report card, and thank you guys for tuning in today. This was completely beneficial. Gina, for me, I can't even calculate how beneficial it was for everyone watching. So thank you sincerely. Thank you, Regine, for being here. You did a phenomenal job.
Yes.
And next week we have a very special guest. Her name is Joanna Hardy. She is a mindfulness teacher, a social activist, and author of a forthcoming new book called Teaching Mindfulness to Empower Adolescents. That's you guys, your adolescents. Till then.
So can I say thank you?
Yes, please.
So thank you so much for inviting me. And this was a complete, utter 100% pleasure to be with you all. And I wish I could have seen all of your faces. And Regine, thank you for giving me your beautiful face to look at as the symbol of all of the students who are behind you. So I'm very honored to be asked and very honored to have been here.
And we're honored to have had you here, Gina. Till next week, everyone. Stay calm and connected. Take care.